Let's plunge into the depths of history's most terrifying moments. Number 10. The Toba Super-Eruption and the genetic bottleneck. 74,000 years ago, on the island we now call Sumatra, the very earth ripped open. A volcano named Toba erupted with a force so immense it almost defies imagination, unleashing an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of magma in a single cataclysmic event. To grasp the sheer scale of this, consider the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which ejected about 1 cubic kilometer of material. Toba spewed nearly 3,000 times that much. This remains the largest volcanic eruption of the past 2 million years, and our ancestors were there, bearing witness to its horrific power. The eruption flung ash across a staggering expanse from the Arabian Peninsula all the way to the South China Sea. Sediment cores drilled from the floor of the Indian Ocean reveal a layer of Toba ash up to 15 centimeters thick, deposited thousands of kilometers from the volcano itself. In parts of India, the ashfall reached depths of 6 meters, burying the landscape under a suffocating shroud of volcanic debris. Every living creature beneath that ash cloud died. Forests collapsed, rivers choked, entire ecosystems ceased to function within weeks. But the immediate destruction was only the beginning. The eruption injected massive quantities of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, where it combined with water vapor to form sulfate aerosols. These microscopic particles became a reflective shield, bouncing sunlight back into space and triggering what climate scientists term a volcanic winter. Global temperatures plummeted by an estimated 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. Some models even suggest regional cooling of up to 15 degrees. The event plunged the planet into a decade of darkened skies, leading to failing harvests of wild plants and collapsing food chains. The cold, relentless, and unforgiving persisted for centuries afterward. Here's where the discovery becomes truly unsettling. In 1998, geneticist Stanley Ambrose at the University of Illinois proposed something remarkable. His analysis of human mitochondrial DNA suggested that roughly 74,000 years ago, precisely when Toba unleashed its fury, the entire human species collapsed to a population of just a few thousand breeding individuals. Some estimates terrifyingly place that number as low as 3,000. Think about that. The genetic diversity of every single person alive today traces back to this impossibly tiny, surviving population. We are all descended from the handful of humans who somehow endured whatever horrors unfolded 74,000 years ago. And the dates, chillingly, align exactly with Toba. What makes this particularly disturbing is the profound implication. For tens of thousands of years before Toba, Homo sapiens had been thriving, spreading across Africa and beginning to venture into Asia. We were just one species among several hominins sharing the planet. Then, something drastically reduced us to a population smaller than a modern small town. Every human who would ever live, every civilization that would ever rise, every war, every discovery, every love story, every child born. All of it descended from perhaps 3,000 survivors huddled against the unimaginable cold under skies blackened by volcanic ash. The truly terrifying aspect isn't that Toba nearly killed us. It's the stark realization that it did kill most of us and we almost didn't recover. Genetic evidence strongly suggests this bottleneck lasted for generations. For thousands of years after the eruption, humanity existed on the absolute precipice of extinction. Any second blow, another eruption, a deadly disease outbreak, a regional drought, an event that might otherwise have been survivable, would have finished us entirely. The modern world and your very existence hinges on the fact that a few thousand people, in the right pockets of Africa, managed to find enough food to feed their children through a decade of darkness. You live because they did, and the margin of survival was almost nothing. Number 9. The Younger Dryas Impact and the Lost Hunters. Roughly 12,800 years ago, just as the last ice age was finally releasing its icy grip on the planet, something catastrophic happened in the skies above North America. The climate had been steadily warming for thousands of years. Glaciers were in full retreat. Forests were relentlessly spreading northward. The Mammoth Steppe, that vast, iconic grassland ecosystem stretching across the northern continents, was transforming into the world we would eventually recognize today. Humanity, too, was thriving. The Clovis culture, with its distinctive fluted projectile points, had spread across the North American continent, a testament to their adaptability and skill. These ancient people, the Clovis, were apex predators expertly hunting the colossal creatures of the Ice Age, mammoths and mastodons. With stone spear points so finely crafted, they represented the absolute pinnacle of Stone Age tool-making. Yet, in the blink of a single human generation, their world violently imploded. Temperatures plummeted by as much as 10 degrees Celsius in less than a decade. Glaciers, once in retreat, began relentlessly advancing again. The climate, with terrifying swiftness, reverted to near-glacial conditions, as if overnight in geological time. This sudden, brutal reversal, enduring for approximately 1,200 years, is known as the Younger Dryas. It's named after a hardy Arctic flower whose pollen abruptly reappeared in European sediment cores, a ghostly botanical marker of the cold's return. Something immense had slammed the planet back into an icy grip just as it was finally beginning to thaw. In 2007, a team of scientists, led by Richard Firestone, put forth a then-controversial explanation. They had discovered compelling evidence across multiple North American sites, a thin, distinctive sediment layer, dated precisely to 12,800 years ago. This layer contained a startling array of anomalies. Microscopic diamonds, bizarre melted glass spirals, significantly elevated platinum levels, and soot signatures consistent with continent-spanning wildfires. This specific layer, which researchers now call the Younger Dryas boundary, has since been identified at dozens of sites spread across 4 continents. The interpretation of this global marker is genuinely chilling. A colossal comet or asteroid had fragmented in Earth's atmosphere, unleashing a fiery cataclysm across the northern hemisphere. This aerial detonation then ignited firestorms that consumed millions of square kilometers of forest and grassland in a terrifying inferno. While the impact theory remains a subject of intense debate within scientific circles, the accumulating evidence continues to mount. Most recently, in 2019, researchers uncovered a 31-kilometer-wide impact crater buried beneath the Hiawatha Glacier in Greenland. Precisely dating this gargantuan scar has proven difficult, but several analyses place its formation squarely within the time frame consistent with the Younger Dryas event. Whatever catastrophic event transpired, it aligned with a series of devastating blows. The sudden, abrupt disappearance of the thriving Clovis culture, the wholesale extinction of 35 genera of North American megafauna, including iconic creatures like mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, and the formidable saber-toothed cats, and a catastrophic population crash among human hunters, one from which it took thousands of years to recover. What makes this particular event profoundly disturbing is the stark fragility it exposes at the very dawn of human civilization. Humanity stood on the precipice of something new, a nascent world with a stabilizing climate, where plants and animals were adapting. Within just a few thousand years, agriculture would emerge in the Fertile Crescent, fundamentally reshaping human existence forever. But first, our ancestors had to somehow survive the Younger Dryas. Imagine the terror, the very hunters who had walked across the land bridge from Siberia, who had doggedly followed the great herds across an entire continent, who had developed some of the most sophisticated hunting technology of the Stone Age, watched their world simultaneously burn and freeze. And the ramifications extended far beyond the Americas. Ice core data from Greenland unequivocally shows that this temperature drop was global. European populations collapsed. Even the Natufian culture in the Levant, which had been bravely experimenting with semi-sedentary lifestyles and the earliest forms of plant cultivation, was brutally forced to abandon its nascent settlements and revert to nomadic foraging. Everything humanity had painstakingly built, every adaptation made, every tentative step taken towards something resembling civilization, was violently swept away. The truly horrifying aspect isn't just the sheer destruction, but how incredibly close we came to losing everything permanently. Had the cold snap lingered for just another 1,000 years? Had the megafauna recovery been slower? Had the surviving humans failed to develop agriculture when they ultimately did? The entire trajectory of human history as we know it could have been utterly erased. Next, number 8. The drying of the Sahara and the forced migration. Approximately 14,000 years ago, as the Younger Dryas finally released its icy grip on the world, something truly remarkable began to unfold across North Africa. The region we now recognize as the Sahara Desert, the largest hot desert on Earth, started to transform into a landscape no living human has ever witnessed. The monsoon rains, which today nourish Central Africa, dramatically shifted northward. Lakes shimmered across what is now bone-dry sand. Rivers, robust and flowing, carved paths through the land. Vast grasslands spread across the continent's interior, and lush forests took root in regions now dominated by endless dunes stretching to the horizon. This period, which scientists call the African Humid Period, or the Green Sahara, lasted from approximately 14,500 years ago until an astounding 5,500 years ago. We have overwhelming evidence hidden in plain sight. Satellite imagery has unveiled ancient riverbeds beneath the sands, revealing vast networks of drainage channels that once carried life-giving water across the entire Sahara. Fossilized lake beds mark the exact locations where enormous freshwater bodies once sustained hippopotamuses, crocodiles, fish, and waterfowl. Rock art, scattered across the central Sahara in places like the Tassili Nadjer Plateau in Algeria, vividly depicts giraffes, elephants, cattle, and even human figures swimming in rivers. These incredible paintings were created by people living in a Sahara that bore no resemblance to the arid desert we know today. They hunted, fished, and eventually herded livestock across a landscape teeming with incredible life. Then, starting around 5,500 years ago, the monsoons began their relentless retreat. The cause was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in Earth's orbital parameters, a slight change in the tilt of our planet's axis that reduced summer solar radiation over the northern hemisphere. The effect, however, was nothing short of catastrophic. Over the span of just a few short centuries, the Green Sahara withered and died. Lakes evaporated, rivers ran completely dry, and lush grasslands turned to dust. The vegetation that had anchored the soil simply vanished, and the powerful winds began lifting sand that had been buried for thousands of years. This transformation was not gradual, it was brutally swift. Sediment core samples suggest the collapse happened with shocking speed, possibly within as little as 200 to 300 years in some regions. An entire ecosystem the size of the continental United States perished within the memory of living grandparents. This is where the human story becomes critically important. The people who had spent thousands of years adapting to the Green Sahara, developing sophisticated cattle herding, intricate fishing cultures, and early forms of settled life, were suddenly forced to flee. They simply could not outrun the relentlessly drying climate. Wherever they desperately went, the desert followed close behind. Some migrated south into sub-Saharan Africa, carrying their precious herds and invaluable knowledge with them. Others moved east, drawn to the only reliable source of water remaining in the entire region, a mighty river that flowed year-round from sources deep in the south. That river was, of course, the Nile. What makes this forced migration particularly significant is its profound consequence. Archaeologists have documented a massive influx of population into the Nile Valley beginning around 5,500 years ago, precisely as the Green Sahara was collapsing around them. The timing, unequivocally, is not a coincidence. These desperate climate refugees brought with them cattle, advanced agricultural techniques, complex social structures, and technological knowledge meticulously accumulated over thousands of years of life in a fertile landscape. They concentrated into the narrow, habitable strip of land along the river, generating population densities never before witnessed in the region. And within just a few centuries of their arrival, something utterly unprecedented emerged from that crowded valley, the first true civilization on Earth. The truly unsettling aspect of this event is the causal chain it starkly reveals. Ancient Egypt, with its iconic pyramids, mysterious hieroglyphs, powerful pharaohs, and thousands of years of continuous civilization, exists fundamentally because a desert ruthlessly killed everyone who tried to live anywhere else. The collapse of the Green Sahara forced a massive concentration of humanity into the Nile Valley, which in turn created the intense population pressure necessary for social complexity, extreme specialization of labor, and the ultimate emergence of the state itself. Without that climate catastrophe, without thousands of refugees desperately fleeing a dying landscape, the civilization that would meticulously define the ancient world might simply never have existed. The survivors of the Green Sahara, however, never truly recovered. The poignant rock art they left behind in Algeria and Libya depicts a world that abruptly ended, a paradise forever lost to shifting orbital mechanics and the merciless, unstoppable logic of climate change. Next, number 7, the Black Sea Deluge and the Flood Memory. Approximately 7,600 years ago, along the shores of a vast freshwater lake in what is now Eastern Europe, thousands of people lived lives that were soon to be utterly erased from the face of the planet. This enormous lake was fed by rivers rushing down from the surrounding mountains and sat precariously in a basin far below the level of the nearby Mediterranean Sea. These two vast bodies of water were once kept separate by a slender natural barrier, a ridge of land at the Bosphorus, the very strip of territory where modern Istanbul now stands. For countless millennia, this ridge acted as an impenetrable dam, safeguarding the pristine, sweet waters of the basin from the encroaching, salty expanse of the Mediterranean. Then, as the last ice age began to recede, a monumental shift swept across the globe. Sea levels started their inexorable climb. Glaciers melting in a dramatic retreat across the entire northern hemisphere unleashed a torrent that raised ocean levels by an astonishing 120 meters over several thousand years. The Mediterranean, in lockstep with this global surge, rose steadily. Slowly, relentlessly, its waters crept higher and higher, pressing against the Bosphorus Ridge. All the while, the vast freshwater lake lying just beyond, what we now call the Paleo-Black Sea, remained serenely stable, its levels perfectly balanced by river inputs matching its evaporation. The divergence in water levels grew profound until the Mediterranean loomed hundreds of feet above the tranquil lake behind the ridge. An immense, unbearable pressure began to accumulate. The ridge, a fragile earthen barrier, held on, but only for as long as the ground itself could withstand the colossal weight of an entire sea perpetually pushing against it. In 1997, a groundbreaking theory emerged from marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman of Columbia University. Their revolutionary findings, based on meticulous sediment analysis and seismic surveys of the Black Sea floor, posited something truly extraordinary. The Bosphorus Ridge had catastrophically failed approximately 7,600 years ago. Once the initial breach occurred, the water, with an almost unimaginable cataclysmic violence, tore a channel through the land. Calculations indicate that the flow rate reached a staggering 40 cubic kilometers of water every single day, an equivalent volume to 200 Niagara Falls, all converging and pouring through a single, gaping fissure in the earth. The Black Sea swelled at an alarming rate, rising up to 15 centimeters daily. Its ancient shoreline receded inland with terrifying speed, displacing water at up to a mile per day in the vulnerable, low-lying areas. The people who lived along the shores of that ancient freshwater lake had absolutely no warning, no comprehension of the cataclysm unfolding around them. The water, an unstoppable force, arrived from the west, a direction from which water had never in living memory appeared. Settlements that had stood for generations were swallowed whole within mere hours. Their fertile fields vanished beneath the deluge, precious livestock drowned in the swirling currents. Entire communities, their lives inextricably woven into the predictable rhythms of a freshwater lake, could only watch in horror as the sea itself rose up to consume their entire world. Intriguingly, archaeological surveys conducted on the Black Sea floor have revealed the stark, silent remains of these ancient structures. Tools, human habitations, all remarkably preserved in the anoxic, oxygen-starved depths. This is compelling, tangible evidence of lives abruptly ended by a flood so monumental that it would echo through the collective memory of humanity for thousands upon thousands of years. And this is where the theory becomes truly unsettling. Ryan and Pittman observed a chilling correspondence in the timing of this colossal flood. It aligned almost perfectly with a period of sudden, widespread migration and profound cultural upheaval across the entire Near East. Communities of displaced peoples mysteriously appeared in regions where they had never existed before. New and innovative agricultural techniques spread rapidly, emanating from the Black Sea basin and fanning outward into Europe and Mesopotamia. And then, shortly after these events, something else began to surface in the historical record: a proliferation of flood myths. Every ancient civilization surrounding the Black Sea and across the eastern Mediterranean preserved elaborate stories of a great deluge, a monstrous flood that utterly drowned the world, forcing the lucky few survivors to flee to higher ground. The Epic of Gilgamesh, a literary masterpiece penned in Mesopotamia over 4,000 years ago, vividly describes a devastating flood unleashed by enraged gods that annihilated all humanity save for one righteous man and his family. The biblical account of Noah and his ark, with different names and protagonists, echoes this identical narrative. Even Greek mythology faithfully preserves the tale of Deucalion's flood. These pervasive narratives were not mere fanciful inventions. They are, in fact, powerful cultural memories meticulously passed down through hundreds of generations of oral tradition, describing an event so profoundly traumatic that it irrevocably impressed itself upon the collective consciousness of every civilization descended from its survivors. The Great Flood, a recurring motif across global mythology, may well be the astonishingly preserved memory of the very day the Mediterranean burst through the Bosphorus and drowned the thriving Black Sea basin. What makes this specific event particularly disturbing is the profound implication it carries for our understanding of historical memory. If these recurring flood myths are indeed glimpses of historical truth, then human oral tradition managed to preserve the memory of a highly specific cataclysm for an astounding 5 millennia before it was finally committed to written form. Each time the story was recounted around a flickering fire, in a sacred temple, or to an eager child, it carried forward the raw, visceral trauma endured by ancestors who watched the waters relentlessly rise against their homes. The few who survived scattered in all directions, their harrowing memories etched into their very being. Generations later, their descendants would lay the foundations of the first cities, invent the written word, and eventually preserve on stone and scroll the very stories their great-great-grandparents had so painstakingly relayed. The powerful pharaohs of ancient Egypt, the formidable kings of Sumer, the revered prophets of Israel, and the eloquent poets of Greece all shared a profound knowledge of the Great Flood. This collective memory persisted because thousands of years before, their distant ancestors had borne witness to a world consumed by water. Flipping continents, our sixth narrative unravels the gripping tale of the Lake Mungo drought and the oldest burial in southeastern Australia. In a region so parched today that life itself seems an impossible dream, lies a distinctive geological formation, the Willandra Lakes. These ancient lake beds are now desolate, bone-dry depressions in the desert. Their once vibrant shores sculpted by the relentless wind, eroding sand and clay into stark dunes. However, a staggering 42,000 years ago, this landscape was utterly transformed. The lakes were brimming, fed by abundant rivers flowing down from the highlands. Their waters teemed with fish, waterfowl congregated in their hundreds along the shores. And here, in this distant corner of the planet, lived the very first humans to reach Australia. They made their homes along these bountiful banks, leaving behind extraordinary evidence of a world that we are only just beginning to comprehend. In 1968, geologist Jim Bowler was surveying the eroded shoreline of Lake Mungo when he spotted something remarkable emerging from the shifting sands: human bones. Over the ensuing years, extensive excavations unearthed the remains of multiple individuals, all carefully interred along the ancient lake bed. The most astonishing discovery was designated Mungo Lady, the cremated remains of a young woman. Her body had been ritually burned, her bones meticulously crushed, and then deliberately buried in a careful arrangement approximately 42,000 years ago. This makes her the oldest known cremation in the entire world. Nearby, another burial revealed the skeleton of a man, now known as Mungo Man, whose remains were sprinkled with red ochre, a practice that represents the earliest example of ceremonial burial ever unearthed. These were not merely bodies discarded unceremoniously in the sand. These were burials demanding intricate planning, a profound understanding of ritual, and a shared belief system concerning death and whatever mysteries lay beyond. The people who buried Mungo Man and cremated Mungo Lady possessed language, a sophisticated culture, deep spirituality, and social bonds strong enough to compel such elaborate funerary practices. In every meaningful sense, they were fully modern humans. And they had reached Australia, a continent separated from Asia by vast open ocean, at least 50,000 years ago. To accomplish this incredible feat, they must have built boats capable of traversing dozens of kilometers of open water. They had to meticulously plan these expeditions. And critically, they had to possess an unshakable belief that something truly valuable awaited them on the other side of the horizon. But tragically, this story takes a grim turn. The very lakes that sustained this flourishing population did not last. Beginning roughly 40,000 years ago, Australia's climate began an inexorable, devastating shift. The entire region grew progressively drier. The rivers that once fed the Willandra Lakes first slowed to a trickle, then ceased altogether. Over the course of perhaps 10,000 agonizing years, the lakes themselves began to shrink relentlessly. The complex ecosystem that had nurtured sophisticated human societies along the lake shores collapsed entirely. The vital waters vanished. The fish perished. The waterfowl moved on, seeking sustenance elsewhere. The humans who had so reverently buried their dead with ochre and fire were grimly forced to abandon the graves of their ancestors, compelled to embark on a desperate search for survival in an increasingly hostile land. The devastating drying of the Australian interior coincided with something even more profoundly disturbing. Shortly after humans first set foot on the continent, approximately 85% of Australia's remarkable megafauna went extinct. This included colossal kangaroos standing 3 meters tall, fearsome marsupial lions with retractable claws, wombats the size of rhinoceroses, and terrifying lizards more than 5 meters long. All of these magnificent creatures vanished within a few short thousand years of human arrival. The precise cause of this mass extinction remains a subject of intense debate. Some researchers point to overwhelming hunting pressure from the newly arrived humans. Others argue that climate change alone was sufficient to trigger such a catastrophic loss. The most probable answer, however, lies in a combination of both. Humans arrived precisely as the climate began its ominous destructive shift. So the combined relentless pressure of human hunting and environmental collapse obliterated species that had thrived for millions of years, vanishing them within what geologists call a mere instant. What truly makes the Lake Mungo story so hauntingly unique is the profound glimpse it offers into the very people we once were. Picture this. 42,000 years ago, colossal glaciers still gripped vast stretches of Earth's northern hemisphere. The last Neanderthals still roamed the ancient forests of Europe, and the magnificent civilizations we now study were still tens of thousands of years away from even beginning. Yet, on the distant shores of an Australian lake, a small community of humans performed rituals. They cremated their cherished dead, lovingly dusted their bodies with ochre, and honored their loved ones with ceremonies, believing in something beyond themselves. They were, in every fundamental way, just like us. They possessed everything we hold dear: language, deep love, profound grief, intricate rituals, and an enduring sense of hope. And then, the vital water vanished. The animals they depended on perished, and their entire world collapsed. All that remains today of the civilization they might have built, had the climate only held, are their ancient graves. Number 5. The Neanderthal Extinction and the last of our cousins. Roughly 40,000 years ago, nestled deep within a cave system in what is now Gibraltar, the last Neanderthal on Earth drew her final, quiet breath. We will never know her name. We don't know the circumstances of her death. And we can only wonder if she understood in her final moments that she was truly the last of her kind, or if she still clung to a fading hope, defying all evidence that others like her might still be found somewhere beyond the horizon. What we do know for certain is that for at least 400,000 years, Neanderthals had not only survived but thrived in the dense forests and rugged mountains of Europe and Western Asia. They had endured multiple ice ages. They had meticulously buried their dead. They had crafted tools, mastered fire, created art, and compassionately cared for their sick and injured. And then, shockingly, within the brief span of just a few thousand years, they were simply gone. The Neanderthals were far from the brutish, unintelligent cave dwellers of outdated stereotypes. Scientific analysis of their ancient skeletons reveals individuals who had survived severe broken bones, lost teeth, and debilitating injuries, hardships that could only have been overcome through the unwavering support of a caring community. Across Europe, countless caves bear witness to deliberate burials, with bodies carefully arranged in specific positions and often accompanied by poignant offerings like flowers or tools, hinting at complex belief systems. At Bruniquel Cave in France, researchers unearthed astonishing structures meticulously built from broken stalagmites, arranged in perfect rings deep beneath the earth. Constructed approximately 176,000 years ago, the builders of these structures had to carry fire into the absolute darkness, meticulously plan their construction, and cooperate in ways that undeniably demanded sophisticated language and a shared intentionality. Neanderthals were intelligent, deeply social, and emotionally complex beings who had utterly dominated the European continent for hundreds of thousands of years before our ancestors ever set foot there. Then, around 45,000 years ago, modern humans began their migration, crossing into Europe from the Near East. For a period of roughly 5,000 years, our two species overlapped. During this pivotal era, something transpired that archaeology and genetics are only now beginning to piece together. The Neanderthals didn't vanish in a sudden cataclysmic event. They didn't die out in a single, devastating blow. Instead, they slowly faded away. Their populations dwindled, their territories shrank. The last remaining holdouts retreated to the southernmost fringes of Europe, to the Iberian Peninsula and the coastal caves of Gibraltar, where they managed to survive for a few thousand years longer than their northern cousins. And then, sometime around 40,000 years ago, the very last of them simply disappeared. The precise cause of their extinction remains one of prehistory's most enduring and profound mysteries. Climate change undeniably played a significant role. The period of Neanderthal decline directly coincided with a series of intensely cold snaps that fractured their habitats and drastically reduced their food sources. Disease may also have been a factor. Modern humans arriving from Africa and the Near East likely carried pathogens to which the Neanderthals had absolutely no immunity. Competition, without a doubt, played a critical role. Both species occupied remarkably similar ecological niches, and the accumulating evidence strongly suggests that modern humans were marginally more efficient hunters, possessed slightly more complex social networks, and reproduced at a slightly faster rate. Over enough generations, that slightly difference proved to be more than enough. But there is yet another possibility, one that genetic evidence is increasingly, compellingly supporting. We didn't merely outcompete them, we absorbed them. Modern DNA analysis has unveiled a startling truth. Nearly every person alive today of non-African descent carries between 1% and 4% Neanderthal ancestry. This implies that the two species interbred, and the offspring of these unions became a permanent thread in our lineage. The Neanderthals, therefore, did not vanish completely. Instead, fragments of their genetic code endure within the bodies of billions of living humans even now. Your immune system, your skin, your hair, even your unique response to sunlight. All these characteristics have been sculpted by the DNA of a species that officially went extinct a harrowing 40,000 years ago, yet still profoundly lives within you. What makes this realization particularly haunting is the glimpse it offers into the final generations of Neanderthals. They witnessed their world shrink before their eyes. They watched as strangers, us, arrived and began to dominate the very landscapes their ancestors had commanded for hundreds of millennia. Some Neanderthals assimilated, joining the newcomers and contributing their genes to the species that would ultimately replace them. Others chose to retreat, clinging to life in isolated valleys and coastal refuges. Their populations dwindled relentlessly until there were simply no more mates left to find. The very last individuals must have perished in solitude. The final members of a people who had ritually buried their dead, tenderly cared for their sick, and dreamed their own distinctive dreams for an astonishing 400,000 years before our arrival heralded their complete end. We are the sole surviving human species on Earth, not because we are inherently superior in all ways, but because we outlasted every other branch of our expansive family tree. The profound loneliness of that fact is a difficult truth to fully absorb. Our fourth entry concerns the Lacasse eruption and the European collapse. Approximately 13,000 years ago, in what is now Western Germany, a mountain then unknown as a volcano violently exploded without the slightest warning. This colossal eruption of Lacasse unleashed an estimated 16 cubic kilometers of magma and ash, making it one of the largest volcanic events ever recorded in Europe over the last 100,000 years. For a sense of scale, the infamous 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens released only 1 cubic kilometer of material. Lacasse, by comparison, spewed forth an astonishing 16 times more. And this cataclysm occurred right in the heart of a continent that had been densely populated by late Ice Age hunter-gatherers, people who had spent thousands of years intricately adapting to the receding glaciers and the burgeoning return of forests and teeming game. The eruption column itself soared more than 30 kilometers into the stratosphere. Ash rained down across an immense area, stretching from southern Sweden all the way to northern Italy, blanket covering much of Central Europe in a layer thick enough to be perfectly preserved in sediment cores and peat bogs discovered across the entire continent. Rivers were violently dammed by gargantuan pyroclastic flows, including the mighty Rhine, which was temporarily blocked by volcanic debris, creating a massive lake upstream of the eruption site. When this fragile debris dam inevitably failed, a catastrophic flood surged downstream, scouring the Rhine Valley and utterly destroying any human communities that had miraculously managed to survive the initial ashfall. The very landscape of Western Europe was fundamentally transformed within a mere few weeks. The precise timing of the Lacasse eruption holds particular significance. It coincided almost exactly with the onset of the Younger Dryas, that abrupt and dramatic return to near-glacial conditions I mentioned earlier in this discussion. Some researchers have compellingly proposed that the eruption itself may have significantly contributed to triggering, or at least intensifying, this devastating climate collapse. The vast quantities of sulfur dioxide released into the stratosphere would have fiercely reflected sunlight, leading to a substantial cooling of the northern hemisphere. The pervasive ashfall, meanwhile, would have devastated vegetation and catastrophically disrupted food chains across Central Europe. When combined with whatever climatic forces were already pushing the world toward the Younger Dryas, the eruption may well have been the final decisive blow that plunged Europe back into brutal Ice Age conditions for the ensuing 1,200 years. And here is where the archaeological evidence takes a truly disturbing turn. Before the eruption, Central Europe was home to a thriving culture known as the Federmesser. These were skilled hunter-gatherers who had perfectly adapted to the warming post-glacial landscape and had spread across the entire region. Their distinctive stone tools, their encampments, and their hunting sites appear consistently throughout the archaeological record of the late Paleolithic era. But then the eruption happened. After the Lac Sea eruption, they simply vanish. The Fedamessa culture disappears almost entirely from Central Europe within a mere few generations of the cataclysm, leaving an unsettling void in its wake. The ultimate fate for those who survived the initial eruption was stark. They either succumbed to its immediate aftermath, or they fled, abandoning ancestral lands that had sustained them for millennia, seeking refuge in regions untouched by the ashfall. Archaeological digs at sites such as Gunnersdorf and Andernach in Germany paint a haunting picture. There, Fedasea settlements lie perfectly preserved under meters of volcanic ash, virtual prehistoric time capsules frozen in time. The inhabitants were granted no warning. Their tools remain precisely where they were dropped, their hearths still holding the charred remnants of their final meals. In some instances, even the exact footprints of both humans and animals are preserved in the ash, tragically fleeing in directions that would ultimately lead nowhere survivable. The deadly ashfall blanketed an area extending hundreds of kilometers from the volcano's caldera. For those caught within its suffocating reach, escape was an absolute impossibility. They perished right where they stood, their lungs ravaged within hours by air choked with microscopic shards of glass. What truly amplifies the gravity of this catastrophe is its profound aftermath. For an astonishing 200 years following the eruption, Central Europe was virtually empty of humans. The archaeological record reveals a chilling silence, almost no evidence of human habitation across vast territories that had once supported flourishing hunter-gatherer societies. When people finally returned, they were distinctly different, bringing with them new tools, different customs, and a completely new cultural identity. The Fedamessa people and all the intricate knowledge they had painstakingly accumulated concerning life in the post-glacial Central European landscape were utterly gone. Every adaptation they had meticulously developed, every ingenious hunting technique, every seasonal migration pattern finely tuned over generations, every shred of ecological wisdom passed down from elder to youth, all of it was mercilessly erased in a single, terrifying afternoon. The mountain they had never learned to fear had abruptly transformed into an inferno. Then we come to event number 3, the 8.2 kiloyear event and the end of the first villages. Roughly 8,200 years ago, a catastrophic shift fundamentally disrupted the global climate. The world had been on a steady warming trend since the final throes of the Younger Dryas period. Ice sheets were in full retreat, making way for new landscapes. The very first agricultural villages had begun to blossom in the Fertile Crescent, and farming communities were slowly but surely spreading across the Near East and into Europe. Humanity was taking its tentative, groundbreaking first steps toward what we now call civilization. And then, without the slightest warning, the climate system collapsed. Temperatures plunged across the entire northern hemisphere by an estimated 1 to 3 degrees Celsius within mere decades. Rainfall patterns underwent dramatic and unpredictable shifts. Severe droughts became commonplace in regions that had reliably received ample rainfall for millennia. This harrowing event persisted for approximately 160 years, and it very nearly extinguished the nascent agricultural experiment before it had a chance to fully take root. The cause of this widespread devastation has been traced to a truly remarkable source. As the last ice age concluded, colossal meltwater lakes had formed both on top of and around the retreating Laurentide ice sheet in North America. The largest of these, an immense body of water known as Lake Agassiz, covered an area greater than the combined size of all the modern Great Lakes. For thousands of years, this enormous lake had been held in check, dammed by the remaining ice sheet, its colossal volume of accumulated meltwater straining against the icy barrier. Then, 8,200 years ago, that critical ice dam gave way. An estimated 163,000 cubic kilometers of fresh water surged out of Lake Agassiz and into the North Atlantic, all within just a few short years. This sudden, massive influx of cold, fresh water profoundly disrupted the thermohaline circulation, the critical oceanic conveyor belt that tirelessly distributes warm water from the tropics towards Europe. Without this vital heat transport, the entire northern hemisphere was abruptly plunged into a period of rapid and severe cooling. The human consequences were nothing short of devastating. In the Fertile Crescent, the pioneering experiment in settled agriculture had fostered communities like Çatalhöyük in modern Turkey, which stands as one of the largest Neolithic settlements ever unearthed. At its zenith, Çatalhöyük housed perhaps 8,000 people within tightly packed mud brick homes, each interconnected with its neighbors, accessed uniquely through holes in their roofs. Its inhabitants cultivated wheat and barley, herded sheep and cattle, fashioned intricate pottery, and adorned their walls with vibrant hunting scenes and geometric patterns. They truly represented the vanguard of a radical new way of life. And then the rain abruptly stopped. Sediment cores pulled from ancient lake beds and cave deposits across the Near East tell a clear story. A severe drought began precisely with the 8.2 kiloyear event. This wasn't just a dry spell, it was a crisis. Crops withered in the fields, livestock perished, and the very foundation of the new agricultural lifestyle, which depended so heavily on consistent rainfall and predictable growing seasons, crumbled under the pressure. The population of communities like Çatalhöyük, once thriving, plummeted. Many settlements from that era were simply abandoned, left to the dust. For a terrifying moment in history, it seemed as if agriculture itself, newly embraced by humanity, might fail entirely as an experiment. It truly felt like humanity might be forced back into a foraging existence, relinquishing the demands of farming to a climate that refused to cooperate. But here's where the narrative takes a pivotal, transformative turn. The drought didn't extinguish agriculture. Instead, it forced it to innovate, to adapt, and ultimately, to strengthen. The communities that weathered the 8.2 kiloyear event were not those that resisted change, but those that embraced it. They spearheaded the development of sophisticated irrigation systems, diversifying their crops to reduce dependence on a single harvest. Crucially, they learned the vital lesson of storing grain, building reserves against the certainty of future failures. They engineered reservoirs to capture precious water and dug intricate channels to transport it from distant sources. This era birthed the technologies and fundamental social structures that would eventually enable the rise of large-scale, complex civilizations. The immense pressures of that sudden cold snap acted as a powerful catalyst, accelerating innovations that might otherwise have languished, taking thousands of additional years to fully develop. Mesopotamia, the legendary land between the rivers, became the very cradle of civilization, in no small part because the 8.2 kiloyear event hammered home a brutal truth. Survival in that region hinged on controlling water, rather than merely relying on its presence. Perhaps what makes this event uniquely significant is the profound migration it triggered. Refugees, desperate to escape the parched Near East, carried their agricultural techniques westward, directly into Europe. Genetic studies have meticulously traced this remarkable movement. The farmers who would eventually spread across the European continent, either replacing or absorbing the indigenous hunter-gatherer populations, trace their lineage directly back to those resilient communities that survived the 8.2 kiloyear event in Anatolia. Without that devastating drought, without the intense pressure that compelled entire populations to relocate and adapt, agriculture might have remained a localized phenomenon confined to the Fertile Crescent. Instead, it blossomed, becoming the foundational bedrock for every civilization that would ever emerge in Europe, across the Mediterranean, and far beyond. The colossal collapse of Lake Agassiz, a catastrophic flood on a continent where no humans even bore witness to it, ultimately reshaped the genetic and cultural tapestry of an entirely different continent, all through the inexorable chain of consequences it set in motion. Secondly, let's turn our attention to the Storegga Slide and the drowning of Doggerland. Approximately 8,200 years ago, at almost precisely the same time as the distant Lake Agassiz collapse, another devastating catastrophe struck the peoples of northern Europe. Off the coast of what we now call Norway, a colossal section of the continental shelf suddenly fractured and gave way. This event, known today as the Storegga Slide, involved an estimated 3,500 cubic kilometers of sediment violently crashing into the deeper waters of the Norwegian Sea. It stands as one of the largest submarine landslides documented in the geological record of the Holocene epoch, and its immense force unleashed a tsunami that utterly devastated the coastlines of the North Atlantic. Waves estimated to have soared up to 20 meters high slammed into the shores of Scotland, Norway, the Faroe Islands, and a place that, tragically, no longer exists but was once home to thousands of people, a vibrant land called Doggerland. Doggerland was the expansive landmass that, at one time, physically connected Britain to continental Europe. During the last ice age, an immense volume of water was locked away in massive glaciers, causing global sea levels to plummet by more than 120 meters compared to today. The shallow basin that now forms the North Sea was then a vast, fertile plain, crisscrossed by rivers, dotted with forests, interspersed with marshes, and sculpted by rolling hills. This ancient landscape stretched from the eastern coast of modern England all the way to the distant shores of Denmark and the Netherlands. Hunter-gatherers had thrived in Doggerland for thousands of years, diligently following herds of red deer and aurochs across its vast grasslands, expertly fishing in its abundant rivers, and establishing their camps along the shores of a great freshwater lake that lay at its very heart. As the glaciers of the last ice age began their inexorable melt and sea levels gradually, relentlessly rose, Doggerland slowly but surely began to shrink. By 8,200 years ago, that vast land had withered to a single large island. Still, communities thrived there, generation after generation, watching the relentless ocean creep ever closer. Then, disaster struck. The Storegga Slide, a massive tsunami slammed into Doggerland without the slightest warning. Archaeological evidence pulled from the few remaining fragments of land and from sites now deep beneath the North Sea reveals a distinct layer of sediment. This layer from this exact period is unmistakably consistent with a monumental tsunami deposit. The colossal wave, an unstoppable force, surged across the low-lying island. It annihilated everything in its path, rendering the soil barren with salt water. Any survivors, if there were any, would have emerged to an unrecognizable homeland. Their world was devastated, their food sources obliterated, their precious fresh water tainted. And still, the sea continued its inexorable climb. Within just a few centuries after that devastating tsunami, Doggerland vanished entirely, swallowed by the rising waves. All that remained were the submerged hills, later known to North Sea fishermen as the Dogger Bank. And this is where the story truly becomes unsettling. Modern trawlers casting their nets across the North Sea routinely dredge up artifacts from the seafloor. These are not mere pebbles, but stone tools, fragments of bone, weapons crafted from antler, and even the occasional human remains. Every single one dates back to the very period when Doggerland was a living, breathing land. In 1931, a fishing trawler hauled up an elaborately carved harpoon point, preserved in sediment that dated back roughly 13,000 years. Other astonishing discoveries include the skull of a young Neanderthal man, ancient hand axes, and the massive bones of mammoths and giant deer. An entire prehistoric world lies entombed beneath the North Sea, perfectly preserved in its anoxic sediments, far beyond easy reach. Each discovery is a poignant fragment of a civilization, a world that ceased to exist when the waters rose. What lends the Doggerland narrative its extraordinary poignancy is what it reveals about both human resilience and profound human loss. The people who called this land home were far from primitive. They possessed sophisticated toolkits, intricate social structures, and an intimate, deep understanding of their environment. They fished its rivers, hunted its game, foraged its bounty, and traded with communities on the mainland. They built families, wove stories, honored their dead, and dreamed of futures on their familiar shores. Then, the sea came for them. Some met their end in the cataclysmic tsunami. Others endured, watching their homeland shrink year after agonizing year until there was simply nowhere left to stand. They fled, seeking the higher ground of what is now Britain or the distant coasts of Europe, clinging to whatever they could salvage of their lives, their culture. Their descendants eventually blended into other populations, and within a mere few generations, Doggerland was utterly forgotten. The truly disturbing aspect of this entire saga is the astonishing recency of these events. 8,200 years ago is not ancient in the grand sweep of geological time. It represents roughly 300 human generations. The first monumental cities of Mesopotamia would begin to rise within a few thousand years after this, and the dawn of writing would follow closely behind. The drowning of Doggerland unfolded within the relatively recent span of our prehistory, and the people who perished there were fully modern humans, indistinguishable from you or me in every meaningful way. They shared the same hopes, the same profound fears, the same boundless capacity for love and for grief. Yet the sea erased them so completely that their very existence, their country, remained unknown to us until modern dredging and seismic surveys began to gently pull fragments of their lives from beneath the waves. Somewhere, in the silent depths beneath the North Sea, the bones of their children lie buried in sediment that was once a vibrant forest floor. This brings us to number 1, the Mount Tambora of the Ice Age and the bottleneck we do not talk about. Approximately 39,000 years ago, in what is now southern Italy, a volcano called Campi Flegrei erupted with a force that rivals any eruption in recorded human history. Known to science as the Campanian Ignimbrite eruption, it spewed an estimated 300 cubic kilometers of volcanic material, an unimaginable volume that marks it as the largest volcanic event in Europe over the last 200,000 years. The ash column alone pierced more than 40 kilometers into the frigid stratosphere. Pyroclastic flows, deadly rivers of superheated gas and ash, raced across what is now the Bay of Naples, burying everything within a radius of hundreds of kilometers. Ash fell as far away as central Russia, where it has been unearthed from archaeological sites in layers thick enough to capture the exact, terrifying moment the sky turned black for the people living there. Among those people were some of the last Neanderthals on Earth. The timing of the Campanian Ignimbrite eruption was unthinkably extraordinary. It exploded during the precise narrow window when Neanderthals were slowly fading into extinction, even as modern humans first began to spread their reach across Europe. For decades, scientists have fiercely debated whether this catastrophic eruption played a direct, lethal role in the Neanderthal extinction, pushing already struggling populations over the brink and into oblivion. Sediment cores extracted from across Europe and the Near East paint a chilling picture. They record a sudden dramatic cooling event that immediately followed the eruption. Massive sulfur aerosols blasted incredibly high into the stratosphere acted like a colossal mirror, reflecting the sun's life-giving light away from our planet. This profound cooling likely persisted for decades, decimating the vegetation and the game animals that hunter-gatherer communities across the continent relied on, all while Europe was already in the icy grip of the Ice Age. The archaeological evidence is stark, etched into the very soil. At countless sites spanning Europe and Western Asia, the distinctive ash layer from Campiflagre stands as an unmistakable dividing line in the archaeological record. Below this ash, you can unearth tools crafted by both Neanderthals and early modern humans. But once you excavate above that ash layer, evidence of Neanderthal tools becomes incredibly, hauntingly rare. The eruption undeniably coincided with, and quite possibly accelerated, the final, devastating collapse of a species that had proudly dominated Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. Whether the eruption was the absolute direct cause or simply the final, crushing blow to populations already in decline, the consequence was undeniably the same. Within just a few thousand years of the Campanian Ignimbrite, the Neanderthals were utterly gone. The merciless volcano, in its raw power, cared not which species it was burying. But here, the story takes an unsettlingly personal turn. Modern humans, too, were severely impacted by the eruption. Our own populations in the Near East and Eastern Europe suffered catastrophic collapses in the centuries that followed this event. Genetic evidence strongly suggests that the ancestors of every modern European alive today passed through a significant, harrowing bottleneck during this period, with their effective population drastically reduced to a mere fraction of its former size. The resilient people who managed to survive the Campanian Ignimbrite and eventually repopulated Europe were a tiny, fortunate subset of those who had lived there before. Every single European alive today traces their ancestry directly through that terrifying bottleneck, through that handful of incredibly resilient survivors who somehow endured the biting cold, the creeping darkness, and the collapsing food chains of the decades after the eruption. What makes the Campanian Ignimbrite so particularly terrifying is the chilling possibility of a double extinction it might have wrought. Two distinct species of humans inhabited Europe when that colossal volcano erupted. One species, the Neanderthals, who had lived on this continent for 400,000 years, vanished entirely in its aftermath. The other species, us, survived by the absolute narrowest of margins. The eruption chose no sides. It simply unleashed its devastating energy into a world that harbored two intelligent lineages. And when the volcanic ash finally settled, only one remained. The razor-thin line between survival and extinction, between becoming the ancestors of everyone alive today and joining the forgotten branches of the human family tree, was drawn by a mountain no one had ever considered dangerous until its fury killed them. The truly horrifying aspect of this entire saga is what it reveals about our very origins. Every time you gaze upon another human being, you are looking at a survivor. Not just a survivor of individual hardship, but the direct descendant of a lineage that miraculously endured multiple near-extinction events, any single one of which could have snuffed out the entire human story forever. The Toba supervolcano nearly wiped us out 74,000 years ago. The Younger Dryas Impact nearly ended us almost 13,000 years ago. The Campanian Ignimbrite nearly claimed us 39,000 years ago. Between these monumental catastrophes, countless smaller, brutal events culled populations, obliterated entire cultures, and severed bloodlines that would never again contribute to the future. The modern world and all its complexity exists only because a fragile but resilient thread of human survival somehow managed to stretch across 200,000 years of repeated, harrowing disasters without finally breaking. Pull any one of those threads, remove any single one of those survivors, and you would not exist. Neither would the person you love most in this world. Neither would any of the civilizations, the groundbreaking ideas, or the timeless stories that define what it truly means to be human. We are the fortunate, the direct descendants of an unbroken chain of equally fortunate survivors, stretching all the way back to those resilient ancestors. They witnessed the sky darken ominously and, against all odds, discovered the inner strength to simply keep moving forward. Every single soul who didn't share their incredible luck remains buried beneath the layers of ash and history. If you're interested in more videos like this one, go ahead and click on the video displayed on your screen right now, and don't forget to subscribe.